first and foremost is an underlying humility that none of us know all the answers.
Jerry Ma is the Director of Emerging Technology and Chief AI Officer at the USPTO.
There's a truly cross-disciplinary effort between folks on the technology side, folks on the policy and examination side, everything in between to figure out how can we get the substance right.
Jerry joined the organization in 2020 and has worked with Charles Kim, the Deputy Commissioner for Patents, to create a cross-disciplinary team to lead the USPTO's efforts around AI.
These areas are just too complex for any individual or any individual skill set to be able to tackle alone.
Welcome to Clause 8, presented by TradeSpace, a revolutionary end-to-end AI-powered IP management platform that helps companies unlock the value of their IP. If you enjoy this show, please take a minute to subscribe on clause8podcast.com for updates and wherever you listen to your podcasts. Today, Jerry and Charles join the podcast to share how the USPTO brought together a cross-disciplinary team to lead the organization's AI efforts. Their goal? A human-first approach to create AI that is actually useful to examiners. And now, here's your host, Eli Mazour.
Jerry, you come from the tech world before the USPTO. Can you tell us how did you end up in this role and what drew you to the USPTO?
Sure thing, Eli. So apologies in advance, this is long-winded, but I like to say that my journey into government service started many, many years ago. I'd always had this abiding interest in law and policy and public affairs ever since grade school. Between one too many Phoenix Wright games and episodes of Suits, 12-year-old me had always imagined getting up in court saying these talismanic phrases that I learned from TV. But I was also super into computers and video games, and it was that latter interest that really won out. But once I finally graduated from high school, I didn't go straight away to college. I actually decided to work full-time as a software engineer at a couple different startups. And eventually I headed to college, fully intending on putting my tech career in the past and doing the usual grad school, law school thing that won't do in pursuing this path. When one of my former colleagues asked whether I was free to hang as a coworker at this new AI research outfit that he had just joined and was trying to scale up. I got this outreach from him and I took a look at my college transcript at the time. I found the shortest path to wrapping up my degree that semester. And then back into Silicon Valley I went the year after, this time focusing squarely on AI research. So I joined what was at the time Facebook AI Research, this lab that had started in New York by Facebook, eventually got roped into lab management. But part of my foray into management involved getting familiar with IP, because I had started being roped into some of our discussions around our lab patent portfolio, IP strategy, so on and so forth. So I ended up getting exposure to what IP was all about. And when I began to consider government service, I really wanted to be faithful to my roots as an innovator and technologist. So I originally had this idea. I just set all my sort of tech experience aside and start doing all this other stuff. But I realized I could perhaps better serve the public and my agency by finding a place to best leverage my sort of experience in AI innovation, research, engineering, so on and so forth. So as I learned more about the federal government and its various components, I think it became really clear that there are few better places to do all this and to innovate in service of the public than the agency literally charged with and devoted to empowering innovators and technologists across the nation, that being the USPTO.
Do you have an initial vision about I'm going to come to the USPTO and I'm going to accomplish X?
So I had a very rudimentary idea of exactly what patents and trademarks were all about 4 years ago when I first joined. I had my patent bar number at the time, but that was about it in terms of my prior knowledge. So I had these naive impressions of, how does examination work? How do patent prosecutors formulate their applications, formulate their claims? And I had a lot of these different priorities that were incoming priorities that I had harbored on top of that impression. And then I show up at the PTO, and it turns out there's a lot cooking under the hood, as it were. And it turns out whatever vision one might come in with, you're quickly disabused of some of your incorrect notions, and you start adjusting what you think you want to do with
Yeah.
what the enterprise, what the institution really needs out of this technology.
You're obviously in the world of AI. Did you have this concept like big organizations should be leveraging AI more, or were you more thinking about AI is going to be a big issue that big government agencies need to be thinking about?
Good question. And I want to hear Charles's take on this because Charles was probably one of the first and foremost folks on this AI scene, as it were, at the PTO. But just my quick take is from a tech perspective, very much the former rather than the latter. I think AI was already a big thing at the time, even if it was not universally recognized as such. You look at these Silicon Valley companies, and even back then in the pre ChatGPT days, the revenue drivers for all these companies increasingly rested on AI and machine learning. You strip away the AI and ML that all of these companies were using in their, say, their business generating, revenue generating activities. And without putting myself on a limb, I think it's probably safe to say you see an order of magnitude drop in revenue without all of that AI ML magic under the hood. It was a big thing, probably driving a solid proportion of US GDP at the time, even pre-ChatGPT, and the challenge was figuring out how to inject that goodness, that sort of magic under the hood, as it were, in the public service. I don't know. I'd love to hear what Charles has to say on this as well.
It's interesting you mentioned that the kind of USPTO drew you because over the years, a lot of startups in the AI space, they contact me, and the first thing they're working on is patent tools. And I'm like, what made you do that? And they're like, it seems like there's a lot of data out there. It's a perfect kind of a domain to apply the AI. So Charles, we want to obviously get to you. You actually lived Jerry's initial dream. You went to law school. You worked at the USPTO and government service many years in a lot of senior positions, moving up now to deputy commissioner. But do you remember when you started thinking about AI while you were at the USPTO and what kind of drew you to that?
Sure. Before I begin, thank you, Eli, for inviting Jerry and I and me to participate in your podcast today. So just when Jerry was mentioning the job posting at the USPTO, I'm not sure who drafted that, but I want to give kudos to whoever drafted that so that we were able to hire Jerry. We're very fortunate to have Jerry at the USPTO. But to your question, Eli, I think my experience in AI is definitely not as interesting and fascinating as Jerry's story. I started working at the USPTO back in 2002, so I think I'm only a couple of years older than Jerry. And I worked as an examiner, a patent examiner in Technology Center, or TC 2600. And I worked in the image analysis area, right? And that included a wide range of technologies, including compression, pattern recognition, as well as AI. So AI was something that I was exposed to as a patent examiner, examining patent applications. After serving as a patent examiner, I was promoted to a supervisory patent examiner in a different technology center, and that was Technology Center 2100, which relates to computer architecture and software. And that's another area where we saw a lot of AI inventions, a lot of AI patent applications. And as I worked my way up through various leadership positions at the PTO, I was asked to join the AI working group. And this was when we used to go into the office, and the team was fairly small. I remember the whole team, we were able to sit around a conference table. So I think there were about 6 or 7 core people that made up that original AI working group. That's how I was brought into working on some of the AI policy initiatives here at the USPTO.
And do you remember what prompted forming the working group in 2019? Do you remember the impetus for that?
So there were AI activities that were ongoing at that time, but it was more kind of ad hoc in nature. We were developing at that time a one-on-one example that relates to AI. It's training a neural network for facial detection, right? It's one of our one-on-one examples. So we were working on that. Our Office of Chief Economist was also working on the Inventing AI report around that time. And we felt that there was a need to coordinate our activities with regards to AI, given the advancement to AI technologies as well as the impact that's having. So there was a need for us to form a team to help coordinate the AI-related activities across the USPTO.
So that's interesting. It came from the patent eligibility issues. Do you remember about the discussion about using AI within the USPTO?
Yes, I think that was something that we had discussed at a high level during there was a conference that was held in January of 2019. And as part of that conference, there were discussions about using AI for patent prosecution purposes, right? And so I think that was the beginning of some of the discussions that we were having around the use of AI as a tool. But I think things really picked up over the last few years as we were able to bring Jerry on board as our first ever director of emerging technologies. And we had the executive order that was recently signed by President Biden. So I think a lot of those efforts supercharged the efforts and some of the discussions that we're having with regards to AI tools at the USPTO.
Yeah. And Jerry joined in the last administration, but I forgot to mention, I saw that his title now Chief AI Officer at the USPTO. Do you remember when you guys first met? And what did you think about somebody with, I guess, Jerry's background joining the USPTO and the impact he might have?
So I was asked to co-lead the AI working group. And at that time, I was co-leading the group with Coach Stewart, who was the acting deputy director of the USPTO at that time. As we were thinking about expanding the team, right, because it started off very fairly small, and we eventually expanded it to around 25 people. And as part of that expansion, we asked Jerry to join the team. And as soon as he joined, I can tell that Jerry was going to be a superstar, right? He really stood out. So Jerry was a member of the working group for a few months. And once Coke left the agency, I think around mid-2022 is when I asked Jerry to join as a co-lead. And Jerry and I, we've been tag teaming and leading the AI and emerging tech working group for the last couple of years now.
One thing Jerry mentioned is that you might have an idea of how an agency works from the outside, but there are a lot of things that you might not consider. Once you join, you find out about. I guess, Charles, it's interesting from your perspective, because I think most of your career is spent at the USPTO. What were you thinking at the time? Can somebody who just joined, I don't know, a few months ago, really understand, coach your working group that's going to have such a big impact in terms of on the future of the USPTO and take into account all the other factors?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Eli. So that is something that I did think carefully about, right? Because Jerry was fairly new. There were lots of members on the team. I think pretty much everyone else on the team, Jerry was here at the PTO longer than you at that time. And I was a little bit concerned about how the team would react if I asked Jerry to co-lead. And it is something that I did think a lot about. But ultimately, I just thought that the value that Jerry brings to the table, to the team, just outweighed any potential concerns. And after we announced Jerry as the co-lead, it was very well received. I think the team was very happy to have Jerry in that leading role. Although there were some concerns, and although it is something that I gave a lot of thought to, and after we made the decision, it was well received, and I think it was definitely the right decision, right? Having Jerry join us as the co-lead.
And I'll just add, Eli, that I think what Charles said and this sort of progression was only possible because of the stellar team that we had gathered across the PTO already, that had this melange of skill sets from a policy to litigator perspectives to, of course, the technology and everything in between. The fact that we had already mustered all this talent and expertise from across the agency, truly a real cross-section of agency into one group, I think is what allowed this interesting mix of sort of Charles's perspective and my own to be effective in steering the AI and emerging technology ship, as it were.
Jerry, is there anything that kind of stands out to you that maybe surprised you or that you didn't consider before you joined the USPTO?
So I think there are a couple of different things that mostly have to do with the layperson's perception of what a patent is, what it typically looks like, and then the actual nitty-gritty details. So if you're studying for the patent bar, as I was in the months before I had actually formally onboarded to the agency, and you learn about patents as these sort of abstractions, and you're answering interesting questions around, okay, when is a first action proper, et cetera, you tend to lose sight of, or I think it's easy to lose sight of all the different exception cases that can pop up. So if you think about marrying this back to AI implementation, the way that AI implementation typically works is there's a 80-20 problem in that there's 80% of the, shall we say, data distribution that's actually fairly easy to train the AI to handle. And then there's usually that sort of 20% sort of long tail of exception cases and whatever data distribution you're trying to model that tend to be the most challenging in terms of making the AI systems actually work for that long tail. I think the patent domain, and certainly the trademark domain as well, has a very complex long tail of exception cases. things that happen that you might not learn about from an IP 101 standpoint, but that you very quickly start to pick up once you're actually in an agency setting. I imagine this is true for practitioners in private practice as well, but just learning some of these exception cases, learning the cases that tend to fall outside the usual patterns, I think is important both in terms of my own onboarding and just learning the ropes, as it were, but also in terms of my conceptualizing the technical problem to be solved by AI. Because again, AI, in most cases, there's a body of 80% easy stuff, as it were, that you can spend a day on and get fairly accurate modeling or prediction or whatever the task is. And this long tail is just the interesting research challenge, as it were. And
Yeah, I guess you have to be more, you can't just ignore the edge cases. You have to give them their fair due.
indeed, and in the public sector, certainly at the PTO, but across the public sector, the sort of the edge cases tend to have disproportionate influence, right? If you think about things that make it to various trial courts or appeals courts, they're not the easy cases. They are, in fact, the edge cases. So too do we have to approach AI with that perspective. What are we here to do? Of course, we want to get the easy stuff right. But what will truly add value is to be able to give our examiners, give our users more information to trawl through those edge cases as well and try to give them as much context as possible, arm them with as much information as possible to make sound determinations.
Maybe before you start on the journey about applying AI or within an organization or thinking through these things that maybe weren't as important for other issues you were dealing with.
I think one thing that's surprising is just the advancement of AI technologies, right? I think it's come a long way, just even within the last couple of years, right? And we were looking at some of these AI and IP policy issues back in 2019. And I think back then it was just more, maybe some of these things are more kind of theoretical possibilities. But I think a lot of the issues that we were thinking about back in 2019, we're actually seeing like it's become a reality, right? So just seeing that change and just how quickly we've gotten there is a bit of a surprise. And the other thing that I think that I've learned working on with the AI team is just the importance of making sure that any policy decisions that we make, that we want to make sure it's informed by stakeholder input, as well as a firm understanding of the technology. We want to make sure that we have a good understanding of where the technology currently is, the current state of the technology, and where the technology is moving, and have that inform our policy discussions as well. And that's something that I think where Jerry has been able to provide a lot of value. And because many of the folks that are working on the team, I don't think they have been as immersive as Jerry has, right? And working closely with AI, involved in AI research. So having that technical expertise in a lot of our policy-making discussions, I think has been extremely valuable.
Part of the story is that obviously ChatGPT came out, I guess, in late 2022. And as Jerry mentioned, when he was applying, looking for a role in the government, it's not a lot of agencies had something like this in place. And I guess when that happened, I guess the USPTO was in some ways fortunate to have the structure in place to ride the wave of innovation that I guess Charles mentioned. And part of that was that you already had partnership meetings planned and ideas that you were planning to discuss and all that. One thing I guess I wanted to ask about, like an overarching question, is I remember I was fortunate enough to moderate a panel at the USPTO about practitioners using AI. And one question I asked there is, do practitioners want more guidance from the USPTO about these topics? And I was surprised, actually, most panelists, most people in the audience kind of said, no, this is an evolving field, better leave it alone, and then we'll figure it out later. The USPTO did end up putting out a lot of guidance, and I'm sure there's been mixed reactions to all of it. But overarching, how did you navigate whether it was appropriate to put out guidance or whether the USPTO should wait and see how these things evolve before doing that?
So with regards to our guidance on use of AI tools, a few months before we published that guidance, Director Vidal actually issued a memo to the PTAB, as well as certain other areas within the office, basically giving some high-level guidance with regards to the use of AI tools. And that was driven by a case at the USPTO where an AI tool, it looked like an AI tool was inappropriately used. And that was against the backdrop of other stories and other situations where attorneys used AI tools, right, in briefings, and there were incorrect information, right, in the briefs. It was against that backdrop that Director Vidal issued her memo. And then we followed that up with the guidance on AI tools before the PTO. With regards to some of our other guidance documents, for example, our mentorship guidance that was issued in February of this year, right? The impetus behind that, there were several drivers, right? One was going back to 2019 when we received two patent applications. You may have heard about them, right? The Thaler cases where an AI machine named Davis was alleged to have invented.
Yeah, Ryan Abbott was a closing guest a long time ago, but yeah.
So we received those cases back in 2019, and we were having discussions about inventorship, but now we had an actual case where this became an issue. In those cases, we actually had to, they were not published. They weren't published applications at that point. And we issued a couple of petition decisions, and we ended up issuing a final agency action, I believe, in 2020. So that was one driver. And then you had the Federal Circuit weighing in, because our decision, our final agency action, was challenged first at the district court, and then it was appealed to the Federal Circuit. And the Federal Circuit weighed in, I believe, in 2022. And I think many people are aware of that decision, right? And the Federal Circuit indicated that a machine cannot be an inventor, right? Inventorship is limited to natural persons. So they did clarify that one issue, but I think there was some uncertainty that may have resulted as a result of that decision, because the court also mentioned in their decision that they're not deciding this issue of whether an invention that's made by humans with the assistance of AI, whether those inventions are patentable. And we did hear some concerns after that decision was issued, especially in the drug discovery space where AI was being used to help develop new drugs. And there was some uncertainty there. So that was another driver behind our inventorship guidance. And then, of course, as I mentioned before, there was an executive order that was signed by President Biden last October. And in that executive order, there were 3 directives specifically for the USPTO. And one of those 3 directives related to publishing guidance on AI inventorship, using AI tools in the invention process. So those are some of the drivers behind our inventorship guidance.
One concern about that I heard is that after the guidance came out, some are worried that the new guidance, even though the guidance, I think, repeatedly says, we're not putting any new rules in place, we're just interpreting the existing rules to apply them to these new situations. But there is a concern because this guidance is a place that now there's an obligation, any use or all information regarding any use of AI in any way when you're inventing to the USPTO. Is that concern valid? Can you put people at ease about that?
Yeah, so we do hear that a lot. So the inventorship guidance does not impose any new burdens or any new additional requirements for disclosure. So applicants are not required to disclose all uses of AI. The inventorship guidance is really focused on the human's contributions, right? The guidance does not look at the AI's, any contributions by an AI system. There are no new disclosure requirements in view of the guidance. That being said, we've always had a duty to disclose, right, under Rule 1.56. So those duties continue to exist. And if there is information under that rule, if there is information that's material to patentability, there is a duty to disclose that information. But the use of AI tools by itself is not something that we're requiring in terms of disclosing the use of those tools.
Jerry, you said one of the things when you were going to USPTO, you were thinking about how can these AI technology be leveraged for the USPTO, and has been working on that. Can you tell us maybe a bit about that journey? How did you decide this is the way the USPTO can use AI tools, and the kind of what's happening with that now?
A lot of the origins of this work actually well predate my time at the PTO. I think Charles had mentioned there are already initial discussions underway many years ago with regard to AI's potential at the PTO. By the time I showed up, there was actually much more than just initial discussion. There were actually prototypes of various tools already underway, a lot revolving around the prior art search space and other areas. But in terms of what was at the time our flagship AI effort, I think it's fair to say prior art search was already a ship that was well under construction, and maybe one could say even well underway by the time I joined. So I was not in the position of, and I'm very grateful for this, starting from a clean slate. We already had a couple of very targeted investments that were already well underway, already beginning to show signs of bearing fruit. And my task in joining was really to figure out, okay, we have these building blocks. We also have these unresolved gaps across the agency. And my job heading in was to figure out where those gaps lied and then figure out the subset of those gaps that can be profitably tackled with AI. Now, some people in the naive view of public administration and perhaps AI's role in government might say, oh, the gap is wholesale adjudication of patent trademark applications. And then they might ask, okay, why have we not inserted an AI to just handle this entire process? And I think these are questions that have come up in popular media channels sometime outside the context of PTO. What is the degree to which sort of government services, government decision making can truly be automated with AI? And at the PTO, I think the one thing we've kept as a cornerstone of our approach to AI is we are focusing on a human first vision for AI at the agency. So we realize that part of what I like to say are the two main currency of the IP ecosystem, right? One is innovation and creativity, of course, that sort of spark of human ingenuity, and the other is trust. So that latter currency is, I think, what we as an agency are very invested in preserving. And we realize that trust only arises from the fact that we have these expert examiners, expert support staff, our adjudicators at the two boards, and across our nearly 13, 14,000 employees, we have a ton of experts leveraging that expertise each and every day in domains where you really need that human nuance, human judgment, human discretion. And we have made it our North Star to figure out how we can empower our examiners, our personnel, how we can empower each of these stakeholder groups to do what they do, fulfill their role in the IP ecosystem with more clarity, with more information, while leaving them firmly in the driver's seat for actually making the determinations and applying the judgment that they apply each and every day.
And I guess practically beyond using it for search, is there an area that you think will be next to empower examiners through AI?
Great question. So we have a lot of efforts underway to explore what AI can do, especially generative AI can do in each of these different domains. I don't want to get ahead of ourselves because some of these efforts, will of course proceed. Others, will realize.
Come on, Jerry, break news.
As much as love to turn the Clause 8 podcast Eli into our dissemination channel, I think some of these efforts might be a bit too early stage for that. But I think the broad themes of what we aim to do, if you work backward from that North Star I just articulated, and you think about needs that examiners have that can potentially be addressed with generative AI, a lot of these things have to do with knowledge management. Prior art search is one very domain-specific version of this general knowledge management problem. We, of course, as an agency, have a lot of knowledge and information that examiners and other personnel need to have on hand and all the different tasks that they do. A lot of this information is in canonical places, but of course, a lot of this information, especially information that might be informally shared between examiners to other examiners, and my world between different developers on different product teams, a lot of this information sharing is actually informal. So this becomes a problem of federated information exposition, gathering from all of these disparate sources, some canonical resources, for example, like the MPEP and the TMEP, sort of probably the prototypical instances of canonical agency sources of information, to the other end of the spectrum, these informal documents, informal knowledge exchange mechanisms that examiners, developers, everyone that agency uses in their day-to-day work. How can we use AI to illuminate these different sources of information across the enterprise and help our personnel synthesize that information into what they need for their day-to-day work?
Charles, we started this discussion, actually, you got involved with this AI thing because of the subject matter eligibility issues. You were an examiner, supervisor, and you mentioned, I think there was a core decision that you had to grapple with when you got involved with it. Obviously, there's been all kinds of guidance being put out by the USPTO. I think the patent bar has been pushing for more guidance, but when it comes out there, I think the reaction is somewhat disappointed. But obviously, you're bound by what the state of a law is. And there's a concern is maybe the state of a law, I guess about Section 101, is such a mess. It doesn't do a good job of providing clarity for the most important part of innovation these days, which is AI. Do you share these concerns? If you could just share your thinking about the examination of AI-related inventions these days.
Sure. We have heard concerns about some of the perceived uncertainty around 101 and how that applies to AI inventions. And in response to some of the concerns that we've heard, in response to the executive order that I mentioned earlier, this July, we issued our updated 101 guidance for AI inventions. And one of the things that we heard was particularly helpful for both examiners and applicants are our 101 examples. So when we issued our patent eligibility guidance back in January of 2019, we followed that up with an update in October of 2019. And we published a whole bunch of examples that apply our patent eligibility guidance to specific factual situations, right? And I believe before we issued our guidance this July, we had 46 examples, and we added to that example set by issuing 3 additional examples that are specific to AI. I think prior to that, there was one example on the example that I mentioned earlier on training a neural network for facial detection. So we did have an example, and that was actually published back in 2019. But we added to the body of examples by providing 3 additional examples that apply our current eligibility guidance. We did not announce any new practice or procedure. That was intended more to provide clarity and consistency and explain how our existing patent eligibility guidance applies specifically to AI inventions. So I think we've heard from some stakeholders about concerns with where the law is around 101. Other stakeholders seem to be not happy with where 101 is right now. So I think there's diverse views. As you may be aware, right, there's discussions in Congress with regards to 101 and other issues regarding patent policy issues. And obviously the courts are dealing with this as well, right? So it is something that we as an agency, we're working with our stakeholders, we're working with the courts, we're working with Congress to provide as much clarity as we're able to, given that we have to operate within the current law.
You have the perspective coming up with this guidance. Is it difficult to do?
Yeah, developing examples, developing guidance, there's a lot of effort that goes into it. It takes months to develop. There's a lot of back and forth. We work with different areas within the PTO. Obviously, we get guidance from Kathy and Commissioner Adupa. It's not an easy process, but we are doing our best to provide as much clarity that we can in view of the concerns that we're hearing, right? So with the July update to our 101 guidance, we had a comment period, right? So that comment period ended, I believe, last month, and we're in the process of going through those comments. So it's very much an iterative process. So we try to engage with our stakeholders. We monitor what's going on in the courts. We monitor what's going on in Congress. And then we work with our stakeholders to develop guidance where appropriate. So that's the approach that we've been taking for the last few years.
Are you hearing from examiners that you were the supervisor, you were helping examiners from the beginning of AI, whereas this is impossible because this is not the exact example or whatever. Like I guess applying guidance for Section 101 is very difficult. Are you hearing that from examiners?
Yeah, I think it's challenging, right? Because while some of our examiners have law degrees, many of our examiners don't, right? We're asking them to apply a very complex area of the law, right? And this is over 9,000 examiners are examining hundreds of thousands of applications per year, right? So obviously that's not easy. So that's why we try to provide these examples. In addition to the examples, we provide training to our examiners, right? So we trained a subset of our examiners soon after we published our July 101 update. And we're currently in the process of what we're calling phase 2 of that training, right? And that's going to likely involve some type of workshop where we go over not only writing 101 rejections, but possibly how to address amendments to claims and provide information to the applicant and make the record clear, right? So that these issues can be resolved as effectively as possible.
Because of all the work you've been doing, actually, Jerry recently won an award, which is the Samuel J. Hyman Service to America Medal for excellence in incorporating AI at the USPTO. And hopefully we got more of that story today about how Jerry ended up involved in this group that Charles was chairing. Thank you for sharing that. But I guess I want to end with, can you share about why your partnership has been so successful? And for other organizations that are only just starting to look at AI, what can they learn from your experience?
Yeah, so I think there are just so many different angles to what makes one of these sort of interdisciplinary collaborations work. I think first and foremost is an underlying humility that none of us know all the answers. And especially in these areas are just too complex for any individual skill set to be able to tackle alone. So now I come to PTO and I realize I have some sort of AI background. I built some of these systems. But hey, when I showed up first day at the PTO, I hadn't the foggiest clue about, so just say what we're talking about, things like 101 beyond the four corners of the patent bar, of course. And it was a gradual process for me of realizing when the bounds of my own expertise, sort of where those bounds were, and when those sort of shifted to perhaps areas where some other degrees of expertise were needed to be brought in and such. And I think it works both ways, right? In that as a technologist, I might know about the technology, but I might need to lean on Charles or say someone from our solicitor's office or someone from any of these other organizational units at the PTO to really understand a specific provision or a specific quirk that informs how we develop an AI system to solve a given problem. And I think vice versa, it also operates to the benefit of folks drafting these guidance documents and such, to be able to have hands-on access, quick access to technical expertise, technical backgrounds that can inform things like the development of the guidance. And I think this is particularly salient with respect to some of those examples that came hand in hand with the 101 guidance. I think those examples, we really invested a ton of effort. There's a truly cross-disciplinary effort between folks on the technology side, folks on the policy and examination side, everything in between, to figure out how can we get the substance right, the legal substance, but also how can we illuminate that substance through technical settings that are maximally informative and that are going to be maximally beneficial to the end users, whether they be examiners or folks reading from the outside. I don't know, Charles, do you have anything to add on that?
I want you to add to that, but also there's probably examiners who are going to be listening to this and they're going to be saying, I want to be like Charles. He's been so successful at the USPTO. Now he's like involved in the coolest thing the USPTO is doing. How to become so successful as Charles at the USPTO? So anything to add to what Jerry said, and if you could answer that as well.
Sure, yeah. So just to echo Jerry's comments, I think a really big part is the team, right? So we have a diverse team that is from across the agency, right? We have litigators and we have technologists, right? We have supervisory patent examiners and we have pretty much representation across the entire office. So that diversity of the team, I think, is really important, as Jerry mentioned. Also, just the makeup. It's made up of just really talented individuals that have really gone above and beyond, right? Most of these projects that folks are working on, right, they have their day jobs, right? So they have their day jobs and they're on this to help out the agency. So they're going above and beyond. And one of the things that I've really enjoyed the last year or so is really seeing how others are growing and developing, right? So giving others kind of the opportunity to grow and to lead. We currently have reorganized the working group where we have different portfolios and we have leads for each of those portfolios. And each of those leads are really doing a fantastic job. And you can just seeing them grow and develop into their roles, I think, has been especially enjoyable for me to see. And also, I think it's important to get the support from senior leadership, right? The support that we've gotten from Director Vidal, from Commissioner Dupa, that's absolutely important as well, because one of the things that Jerry and we often talk about is you can have great ideas, right? But how do you take those ideas from idea to implementation? And you need to get buy-in, and you need to get buy-in across all different levels, but especially from the top, right? And Director Vidal has been extremely supportive of the AI and emerging technology working groups efforts. She's been closely involved. She's given us clear guidance and direction. So the clear direction and support from the top, as well as just the talent of the team, I think is a recipe for success. Going back to your other question, Eli, about just how to be successful in general, I think it's one of the things that I often tell people is it's important to step outside your comfort zone, right? I never imagined that I would be working on the AI team when I was a supervisor back in TC 2100, right? But I was able to take that step outside my comfort zone. And I think that's how you can grow, experiencing new things and stepping outside your comfort zone, I think, are really important to grow. And when you grow, I think it sets you up for success, not only at the PTO, but anywhere, pretty much any organization.
All right. Thanks, Charles. Thanks, Jerry. Thank you for joining Clause 8 and sharing your story. And I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for listening. New episodes of Clause 8 come out every 2 weeks, so be sure not to miss it by subscribing at clause8podcast.com and wherever you listen to podcasts.